Hello there and welcome to this week's edition of Money Matters, because as you know, money does matter. So what are we talking about this week? From sunny Doncaster. Yes, I'm back in the United Kingdom for just a few days. Well, the topic you can't ignore, love it or hate it, is politics. So, Boris has finally gone, or has he? And what kind of economic impact is that going to have on the country? Well, huge, actually. Not so much that Boris has gone, because, we are going to miss his glowing leadership style with his entirely, subdued sense of humour, never drinking to excess, not getting the police called to his house, not even, in fact, having the police called to his house after drinking and shouting match between him and what is now his wife. So, this colourful character has moved on, at least for now, and what I want to talk about in particular is the leadership contest, the Tory leadership contest, and what that may well mean for the UK economy. So we've got a whole list of candidates here, and I'm going to go through them one at a time. But the central thing that I want to address before I do that is actually twofold. Number one, the national debt, and number two, house prices. Because government only has two sorts of money. Sort of money number one is yours and mine. They take it off us. So it's called tax. And they don't actually they don't do anything productive of their own. So what they do is they take all the money, all the tax, the VAT, the national insurance, the PAYE, the income tax, the corporation tax, all the tax. So they take all of that off people that are actually economically active, and on the basis they're not economically active, they think they can spend it better than we can. You can probably form your own view on that. So that's the sort of money number one. And within reason, that's fair enough, because you can understand it, it's actual real money that's been earned, it's got some sort of economic even pedigree. The other form of money, which is where my mind was going, is quantitative easing. It's printing money, it's mythical money. So what happens here is that you've got various parts of the government. So you've got this thing called the Monetary Policy Committee, and in theory that's independent, and it recommends what the interest rate should be. Then you've got the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, and I want to come back to them in a second, that essentially are like internal auditors, and they tell the government, even though they are the government, they say, if you carry on doing this, then it's going to end in tears. And then you've got the Bank of England. So you've got various bits of various government or quasi-government organisations that are authorising the printing of money, authorising the sale of debt. But here's the thing, somebody needs to pay the piper. Now, I want to focus now, before we start talking about the various Tory candidates, because this is central to all of them, it's about tax. The OBR recently published this report just a few short days ago. So here's this report that you can see on screen now, and this is a BBC article, and you just make a note of the title, you can go and read the thing in full. But what it says is this: in just the month of May this year, so 2022, the government had to borrow a record amount, more than £7 billion, just to pay the interest on the national debt. That's thing number one. Thing number two, that's an increase of more than £3 billion on the May before. Why? Because one part of the economic mechanism has put up the interest rate. So the Monetary Policy Committee has increased the base rate, not by a lot. It's only gone from 0.1 to 1.25% in that time, but that tiny little increase, in relative terms, has massively impacted the cost of debt to our government and therefore to us, because they don't have any money. We're the ones that are paying for that. So I was asked this question on our Touchstone Education Facebook page by a guy called Ian Mylan, and what Ian said, you can see his comment here, what Ian said is, well, Paul, you lived through the 1990s recession like I did. I'm a property investor, and I'm a bit worried that, with inflation and everything, interest rates are going to shoot up to 10, 12, 13, 14%. Well, they can't. And the Office for Budget Responsibility has said that they can't. And it's also said that the government is in critical trouble with regard to its finances. This is a government report. So what's causing that? Well, I've tried to keep it dead simple. And what I'd want to compare it to is a 75% buy-to-let mortgage on a property. Now, we all know as landlords that if you've got a 75% buy-to-let mortgage, you're charging your tenant a sensible rent, all the figures make sense. If I take you back to the 90s, look at this chart. This chart says how much do we owe as a percentage of our GDP. So it's automatically adjusted for inflation. So it doesn't matter what the actual numbers are, but just think of it like a percent buy-to-let mortgage. So the percent buy-to-let mortgage back in the day, in the early 1990s, was about 40%. And if you follow the graph down, it dips down into the 30s, and then it climbs up a little bit, and it got boom, it shoots up during the 2008-2009 recession because all the money that was pumped in to support the economy. And this chart only goes up to 2019. And by 2019, debt as a percentage of the GDP, so the GDP is the gross domestic product, that's everything that the country produces, all added together and turned into money, goods and services. It was in the mid-80s, and this chart stops there. The most recent report I saw said that the debt as a percent of GDP is over the magic 100%. It's now 104.5%. Yeah, this number changes all the time, so by the time you watch it, it's probably wrong. Now, if you think about that as a buy-to-let mortgage, so the buy-to-let mortgage, the debt to the income, if you like, of the country, back in the 90s, was 40%. It's now over 100%, so that's 2.5 times higher. So what was comfortable back in the day is now 2.5 times more. So let's say you've got a 75% buy-to-let mortgage on a property and you times it by 2.5, well, you're 180, 190%. Imagine you're trying to pay a mortgage of 200% of what a property's worth, but you're only getting the regular rent. That is the problem that the government's got. They've got massively more debt than they've got income. So the reason that they can't put up the interest rate, just can't, is because they won't be able to afford the debt repayments if the interest rate goes any higher than 3, maximum 3.5%. And I've seen analysts that say it's as low as 2%. So maybe this crazy government of ours has got wriggle room to print a few more trillion and put up the interest rate by another 1%, maybe. And after that, it's not us landlords that won't be able to pay the mortgage, it's the government that whatever it does, with whatever economic trickery, can't pay the national debt. What happens when that happens? Sovereign debt default. Never happened. The government cannot let that happen. So what's the only other way they can let that debt get destroyed, get eroded? Dead simple. It's called inflation. Inflation destroys the value of debt, and inflation is the property investor's friend. It puts up rents, it puts up house prices and puts down debt. So just think about the UK like a gigantic buy-to-let. The mortgage has gone over their head. They're now in negative equity, not because the property's gone down in value, it's because the property, property's whatever it's worth, but they've borrowed, getting on for twice what the property's worth, and they have got no way of repaying it, and they can't sell it because they're in negative equity. So, with that as an economic backdrop, we're in debt up to our eyeballs, we can't borrow anymore, we can't put up the interest rate, and we've got inflation raging away. It's actually in the government's interest to let inflation rage away because it will burn down that mountain of debt. But do you know what inflation is actually? It's the biggest tax that you will ever pay. It destroys savings. Now, with all that as an economic backdrop, and Boris is gone, I now want to go through the Tory candidates as correct at the time of recording this today. By the time you watch this, there'll probably be another 23 candidates with their hats in the rings, like 7 a day or whatever it is. Anyway, here we go. And by the way, most of them, even if you're interested in politics, you've probably never heard of. Okay, so first up, let's deal with the two that you probably have heard of. So we've got Rishi Sunak. Until very recently, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I've just got my notes over here. Sunak has indicated he'll focus more on fiscal prudence than immediate tax cuts. Makes him very unusual in his leadership. In his video, he took aim at other candidates, saying they may offer comforting fairy tales. I actually agree with him there. Rather than face the hard economic reality, but for goodness sake, we've had 20 years of austerity. Is he really saying this Chancellor that, chucked money in the air, turns out he's married to one of the richest billionaires in the world, and there were some questions asked about his tax affairs and all that sort of stuff. Is he really saying that he can live the billionaire's high life and leave the normal person down in the dirt, scratching around for something to eat? So in a field populated by other candidates promising cuts, this may become a challenge. So Jacob Rees-Mogg has dismissed Sunak since the contest began as a high tax chancellor. Now, the next one that I'm going to move on to on my list here is Sajid Javid. Now, to make it a bit of fun, these two are really good friends. So Rishi and Sajid are actually both big, avid Star Wars fans. So I just thought, well, as the leadership contest develops, which Star Wars character would they all be? And they started it because they like Star Wars. So Rishi, to me, could actually be Darth Sunak. So what do you think? Rishi, Darth Vader, Darth Smack. Could that be a character that might just fit him on the next Spitting Images release? So let's move on to his good Star Wars friend, Sajid Javid. Or, as I would like to propose he could be called, and put your comments below as to which Star Wars character you think all these people are. Are we in fact looking at Javid the Hutt? What do you think on screen? Similarities? Anyway, Javid has promised to scrap the former Chancellor's plans to raise corporation tax from 19% to 25%. Woohoo, says everyone. Anyone's got business, of course. The problem there is there's less real money coming into the kitty. And reduce the rate to 15%. So never mind going from 19 to 25, you must go from 19 to 15. Well, as a business owner, that gets my vote. The only problem is, I'm kind of drawn to Rishi's comment that this is a comforting fairy tale. You know, in a universe far, far away, this might be quite sweet. Down here on planet Earth, might not work so well. Those are longer memories. Well, remember that he pushed hard for more health and social care spending when he was running that department. So all those long months ago, he had different plans, but now he sees the chance to whiz into number 10 as Boris and the cat move out, and he's changing his tune. But I guess that's probably just what most politicians do. Okay, let's go from the top. So we've now got a person called Kenny Badenoch. I don't actually know if I've pronounced that name right or not, because I've never heard of her. So she's pledged to introduce a microstate. So the end of big government, the end of government telling you what to do. This is the same party that just locked us all up with zero consultation for the best part of 2 years, spent a load of money that we didn't have without consulting us, and she now wants to go back to micro-government. Oh, well, yeah, I've watched what my party did for the last 2 years. It was a total and utter disaster. So what I actually suggest is that we do as little as possible. Now, naturally, I actually agree with that. I think that's a good idea. Stop taking all our money off us, leave it more of it with us, and we can do sensible stuff instead of the nutty stuff that you're all going to do, Mr. and Mrs. Politician. And she said she's going to lower taxes, but this will boost growth and productivity, and will be accompanied by tight spending discipline. So, Kevin, let's work out what Star Wars character you are, but you know, that sounds sensible. Okay, so we've got Suella Braverman now, pictures herself as a believer in the efficient, low-tax state, whatever that means. Crediting her mother with the belief in her that if you want something done, you have to do it yourself. So she pledged to get spending under control, cut VAT on energy, all while scrapping net zero. So that doesn't sound very green to me. Cut VAT on energy, get spending under control, and if you want to do something properly, you have to do it yourself. Well, that's fine. But you know, the thing is, if you're the Prime Minister and the civil service and the education sector and the public service, all the people that work for government, that's around about 50% of the workforce. Now, if what you're thinking is that you're going to sack all of them and you're going to do everything yourself, I think you've got a wake-up call coming. So I think it's fine, you know, if you're in the woods and you're camping or something and you want to become self-sufficient, like, you know, Penelope Keith in The Good Life or whatever it is, for those of us that remember all that. But to go into government, to seek to run the country with the strapline, if you want something done, you've got to do it yourself, is a bit dismissive of everybody else that's put there to help you, isn't it? Next up, we've got Rahman Chisti. Chisti said he wanted to lower tax but gave no details. He's thought this plan through, hasn't he? So,
what I'm going to do is I'm going to run for Prime Minister, if I get elected, I'm going to cut tax.
Yeah, okay. Any details?
Nah, I'll just work it out. See in my pants.
I mean, blimey, get away with that. You're probably one of the Jedi, I expect. Let's move on to the next one. Jeremy Hunt has promised the lowest rate of business tax in the Western world. That's a bold promise, isn't it? Including pledging to cut business rates for 5 years for the most in-need communities. Well, Jeremy, I think you're going to struggle to find a community that doesn't think it's in need, so that's the entire country. It is a change of tune for the candidate, seen as more to the left of the party. When he stood for the leadership in 2019, he mooted the idea of raising the threshold for national insurance and a tax cut for low and middle earners, and increasing defence spending to 2.5%. So he is talking about decreasing taxes to the lowest in the Western world. Business taxes. Well, business taxes for me are corporation tax and VAT, the lowest in the Western world. Well, Jeremy, I don't know if you know where Liechtenstein is, but corporation tax there, my friend, is very much in the Western world. It's 12.5%. So are you saying you're going to undercut Liechtenstein and Luxembourg? I'm just fascinated, because if you really mean that, if you really mean that, instead of moving my companies offshore to Liechtenstein, I might leave them here in the UK. And if you really mean you're going to cut VAT, I might welcome that as well. I suspect, however, you haven't entirely finished your geography class yet, and you don't know where places like Liechtenstein are. So, just saying, but no, if you really do that, then you are a nailed-on candidate. You could be Jeremy Skywalker. That is the potential sobriquet that could be attached to your name if you get away with that. Now, we've got Penny Mordaunt, I don't know how do you say that? Penny Mordaunt, expressed her hope that in the next few days we'll be able to discuss how we get our economy growing again and enable our citizens to live well. But it's currently more preoccupied with fighting off critical questions about her views on gender. So I think there's a few people here that have got the odd little skeleton that might want to get out of the cupboard and address before they start lecturing everybody else. But how do you feel about someone that's been elected several years now, and in the middle of a leadership contest, she's put forward the view that in the next few days we'll be able to discuss how we get our economy growing again. For Christ's sake, what's the government been doing for the last 2 years? That's just beyond childish. No votes from me. Grant Shapps' focus has shifted from transport to his desire to rebuild the economy and tackle the country's cost of living crisis, ruling out a general election. To be honest, whoever gets elected would have to be insane to go for a general election. They've got a big majority. Why would they go for a general election? He said he'd produce an emergency budget, instructing his Chancellor to cut personal tax for the most vulnerable and giving state support to firms with high levels of energy consumption. All right. So as a government, we're going from net zero to let's subsidise energy polluters. That is quite a 180, isn't it, in one go? So no general election, emergency budget, and he will instruct his Chancellor to cut personal tax for the most vulnerable. Interesting. Who are the most vulnerable? Who are the most vulnerable? Is it the people that have got absolutely nothing and they don't pay tax and they're on benefits? Are they the most vulnerable? Because you can't cut their tax because they don't pay any. Is it the person that is on, works her backside off to look after their family and they're a basic rate taxpayer? And is it because they're looking after an elderly relative? Is it because they've got umpty-tumpty children? Is it because their other half just got made redundant and now they did have 2 salaries and now they got 1? Are they the most vulnerable? Or is it the good old British middle class that maybe earns 50,000 to 100,000, they're higher rate taxpayers, but they've seen their pants well and truly pulled down and they've been taxed senseless? Are they the most vulnerable? Or is it all the MP's mates on 150k plus who are feeling vulnerable because they can't have 6 foreign holidays a year? I don't know. I'm just saying that you see the odd thing with politicians that it maybe comes to light that their motivation is not quite as pure white as some might think. Anyway, let's move on. Almost there, you'll be pleased to know. So we've got Liz Truss. Truss has been at pains to paint herself as an heir to Thatcher. Not sure that's going to go down too well in Liverpool and some other places. But I'm not sure if Liz Truss and maybe some of the other Tory grandees are aware that the only reason they got a majority is because they managed to punch through the red wall. Boris, for all that you might say about him, was elected with a very clear mandate to get Brexit done. And that was something that unified massive swathes of the country and enabled the Tories for the first time to punch through the red wall. Thatcher never did it, never came close. So if Liz thinks that she's going to become the Prime Minister on that ticket and essentially abandon the North, anywhere else that you might want to get some votes, she's painting herself as the heir to Thatcher. Well, that's a very Marmite play, isn't it? You're going to love it or hate it. So she stated that in an economic pitch rooted in low tax principles, higher defence spending, and trade deals would set her apart from other heavyweight contenders, and she's memorably hailed young people as a generation of Uber riding, Airbnb-ing, Deliveroo eating freedom fighters. So if she's managed to irritate maybe, traditional Labour areas by having a go and saying, I'm the next Mrs. Thatcher. Brilliant strategy number 2, she's completely dismissing everybody under the age of 30 as Uber riding, Airbnb-ing, Deliveroo eating freedom fighters. She might just as well say, tree huggers and snowflakes, mightn't she? I'm not really sure which segment of I am sure which segment of the population she's going for, and that ain't going to win a general election. But interestingly, What it might do is win a Tory party election to make her Prime Minister, and from there she'll have to do a 180, won't she? Otherwise the Tories are not getting elected. The problem for her is that although instinctively many Tories might want to vote for that, they also know that you're not going to get elected like that. Let's finish off with the last two that I've got on my list here. Nadim Zahawi. Zahawi stated that thanks to Brexit, we're now a free nation. Financially free, are we? Don't think so. That now needs to stop talking about opportunities and take them. He has called for a review of the UK's corporate tax policy and a clear hint that the rise from 19 pence to 25 pence next year could be reduced or scrapped. So another low tax candidate. So you can see the problem. Go remember what I said 10-15 minutes ago. The Office for Budget Responsibility, part of the government, says we can't do this. We either need to reduce spending massively or increase taxes massively. What are this lot all saying? Well, with one exception, which is the Chancellor, or the ex-Chancellor, sorry, Darth Sunak. He's the only one that's saying he's going to be financially, prudent, or whatever the right word is. Whereas everybody else is, let's have a big jamboree, let's give all the money away. But the government itself, the OBR, says can't do it. So, and that's why Darth Sunak is saying that they're all telling or peddling, I think it was the word he used, economic fairy tale or something like that. So let's finish off with, I think, the most appropriate end piece that I can possibly leave you with. This is Tom Tugendhat, pitching himself as the cost of living crisis candidate. Tugendhat has promised an unrelenting focus on the issue, despite being perceived as about the most left-wing candidate in the contest, that's within the confines of the Tory party, obviously. Tugendhat has nailed his tax-cutting credentials to the mast, saying that taxes, bluntly, are too high. Now that's going to play well with the gallery. Problem is delivering it. And he's called for additional national insurance hike to be scrapped. And he actually voted against it at the time, so maybe he isn't, he's one of the few that's maybe not changing his colours. And he wants a drop in fuel tax and the dropping of unconservative tariffs, whatever that means. And just as a final thought, really as a comment on the whole lot of them, I don't know if you've got a preferred candidate or if you believe that they can actually lower taxes magically somehow and produce more money for everyone to go living happily ever after. But dear old Tommy boy here, I'm really not sure which Star Wars character he is. I just want to share with you his campaign logo because I think it sums up pretty much the whole exercise appositely. Here's his logo. What do you think? Is this a good comment on the entire Tory party leadership campaign? Hope you enjoyed that emergency edition of Money Matters because it really is at the heart of everything we're doing. We're business people, we're investors, we want to make sure that we grow and protect our wealth. Which one of these candidates, if any, is actually going to help you to grow and protect your wealth? Which one of these candidates have you got your money on to do the right thing for UK PLC? You've been wonderful, I've been Paul, see you on the other side.